Okay, we
We're
are
now
back live, and this is Senate Finance, and we are going to resume our discussion of S-269. This was the Energy Savings Account Partnership Pilot Program that, because of COVID, never quite got off the ground. We had a coalition of Efficiency Vermont was heading it. I believe there were some of the participants and maybe the PUC involved, and they came up with some recommendations. This was a trial to, well, Ellen, I'll let you fill us in. It was part of an overall effort to broaden efficiency to more than electric utilities, and see if we couldn't achieve better results by perhaps broadening the definition. So, Ellen.
Right. So Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Yes, you will recall that as introduced, S-269 sought a blanket 3-year extension of the Energy Savings Account Partnership Pilot Program. That was a program your committee created or worked on in 2018. Under that legislation, the pilot is set to expire in June of 2022. So that's part of the reason why it's before you now. And as the chair just mentioned, you did receive testimony that the bill as originally proposed, which is a straight 3-year extension, isn't quite what the involved parties have agreed to. So I reviewed the testimony that you received from Efficiency Vermont, and you received that testimony on February 11th. And in their presentation, they recommended 4 things that the parties involved have agreed to. So I have attempted to put them in an amendment to this bill. I'm not sure if I have got it exactly right on the first try, but to remind you, and part of this is because I watched the testimony and it is a little bit light on some of the details.
Yeah.
So there are some things for you to consider. So
Okay.
the first element of their proposal is they agree to an 18-month extension for all pilot participants. The participants may choose to opt out of this extension if they don't want to continue, and they can do this by written notice to the PUC by the end of 2022. They also agreed to establish a working group with the Department of Public Service, the Efficiency Vermont and ACCD, as well as the participants of the pilot and the 1 participant of the existing ESA program. That working group would look at making recommendations to sort of combining potentially the 2 programs that are very similar. There's a statutory ESA program, and then you have this pilot program, which has a little bit has some different aspects to it. And so there's going to be a working group to look at what changes should be made to the statute. 2 other things. They recommend keeping the verification date, that the department complete its verification work that it's doing, and keeping that date that was originally in the underlying bill, as well as the PUC's evaluation and report back to the legislature in 2023. So keeping those the same as they have been. And then finally, the last one is an extension of the program until December 2026 for anyone who requests that further extension. The PUC can decide to allow this further extension for reasonable requests. So that's one of the elements I'm not entirely sure of, but I will put up on the screen the language I've come up with to address these four elements. Although it's really 3 elements because they asked to keep the verification and reporting requirement the same.
Right, and these are all the same. Were there 12 participants in this pilot?
I believe there's 9.
9, okay. So this wouldn't be letting any more companies in. It would be extending for 18 months the deadline for them to get approved and to draw down the money and to complete the project. And then they could, I guess, get an extension, the same people. And if I remember, we heard from the woman that did the optical lenses, and they redid some very expensive machines, but they have a bunch more. So they might, if this achieves the energy goals we want, I guess they might be one that might like to do a couple more machines. But we'll see. So Ellen, walk us through.
Okay, so so this is a little bit unusual, but it shouldn't be too, hopefully it's not too confusing.
Now, this whole thing is a little unusual, so.
Right. So the pilot program is not in statute, it's in session law.
Okay.
So the bill before you and this amendment are amending that session law. And so I just made a few small changes. First, in the language on page 1 that establishes the pilot program, I made a very small change. So it says on or before July 1, 2019, the commission by rule or order shall establish a pilot program for customers to self-direct. And in the bill as it came to you, this language read 6-year pilot, but since at this point the exact number of years is a little unclear, I just struck the reference to years and just establish a pilot program.
Okay.
Which the PUC did by order, and so that has already happened.
Right.
So the next very small change is on page. Was there another one? No? Okay, so then there's language on page 3 to address the other extension language. So we're still in the section in this session law provision that has the elements of the pilot program. And so I just added to the elements section because I wasn't really sure where to put this language, but so the pilot created pursuant to this section shall be extended an additional 18 months until December 31st, 2024. The commission shall allow the current participants in the pilot to decline to participate in this extension by submitting written notice to the commission on or before June 30th, 2022. So that's the first element of the proposal from the parties, is this 18-month extension. I kind of picked those dates based on reading through some of the materials, so I think those dates work. I'd want to maybe get confirmation from the parties that those are the dates.
Yeah, we will send this over and get testimony from them. Maybe Friday. Well, I guess this one doesn't have to come out until the week we get back. So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would maybe, I did start reading the order that the PUC issued initially. I do want to make sure it's clear because it wasn't entirely clear to me. I think the parties all know what they're talking about, but this just says an extension. And so there's 2 sort of dates that the parties have talked about. It's when the money needs to be committed and when it needs to be spent by. I believe that there's like a slight distinction there. So I think this language covers it. I would like confirmation from
was it June of this last year, maybe
this year
that the plan, well, there was plan approval, maybe that was last year, and then the money had to be committed because they had to have all their contracts and stuff done. And nobody has drawn, I think there were 3 or 4 plans approved, but nobody has reached the point of being able to draw down the money. It's taken longer. A lot of it is supply chain and COVID. But it's so that we don't have a pilot at this point. We don't have enough experience, which is the reason they're asking to keep going. But we'll check on those dates.
So then subsection 5 I've added is about the other further extension. So the participants selected for the pilot may request an additional extension until December 31st, 2026. The commission shall consider requests and approve all reasonable extension requests. That was the language that was in the presentation from the parties. So I don't know if you'd want to consider more specific language than that about.
Well, is it an extension to finish the present project because they can't get raw materials or labor? Or is it we got permission to modernize this room, weatherize, do whatever? And that's worked so well. Now we want to do, another section of our factory. So that may be a question. Is this moving this on to another project, not another, but similar? Or is it just additional time to complete the present plan? So that's a question I think to be asked. Any other thoughts? Senator Bray.
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question, Madam Chair, because it's one thing to push out a date because of supply chain and COVID to provide additional time to sort of observe how the pilot's working, get some results, and analyze whether or not we want to keep going. I'm a little concerned about now we're up to 24, and then there number 5 allows time all the way out through the end of 26. So I appreciate your question. It's one thing to get something approved and it takes longer to build. It's another to keep on marching, right, using an additional 2 years worth of energy efficiency charge dollars, for instance, that otherwise would have entered the general pool of energy efficiency charge dollars.
And we may want to put an evaluation piece on the end of this if it isn't there already. Like, is this worth continuing?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator Pearson.
I totally agree with Senator Bray and with you about evaluation. And as I understand it, the pilot itself has an evaluation baked in already.
Yeah, I think it does.
Which is why I'm open to all of this, other than this sort of secondary potential for extension. I think, the whole construct was, well, we'll see. We're willing to experiment with this concept for certain players under certain circumstances, and we'll measure that and see if it keeps going. We haven't measured it because it hasn't finalized, and here we're being asked to extend it. So for me, I think you're right to ask about the evaluation. I think that is baked in, and short of having that conclude, I would only be willing to support the most modest extension here. And I would say to council, your first change of removing 3 years is not a modest change, and I don't know what the right number of years is after we sort it out, but I would very much want to see some conclusion baked into this, just based on the integrity of the initial proposal of, okay, let's try it, let's measure it, and then we'll analyze.
Okay. So I guess you can continue, Ellen.
Madam Chair,
Senator
Brock.
Brock, okay.
Uh, I don't object to the 3 years because it makes sense based on the passage of time. On the other hand, when we talk about the additional extension that's in here, my question there is, the participants all got together to come up with these changes, and we haven't really heard any testimony as to why this was put in. And I'm just concerned that by rejecting it out of hand, we may miss something. And I think we at least ought to ask them, why did you do this?
Oh, yeah, no, we're going to ask. And
I mean,
again,
that to
we've
me
got
is the
Ellen
first step
listening to the
before either
tape.
accepting or rejecting it.
Yeah, no, we're going to send these proposals to them and ask for them to come in and give us their reasoning. And again, this wasn't directly their proposal. This was Ellen listening to the tape and trying to discern what they were asking. So this may not be exactly what they were asking
Don't
for.
rush to a conclusion without hearing what people have to say and testify.
Yeah, and we will do all of that. So, Ellen, why don't you keep going?
Okay. So again, I struck the language on line 11 referencing that this was a 3-year period
Yeah,
of the pilot. And this is in the section on the energy management plans. So it was a little unclear to me from the testimony, and I think that feedback on this element would help too. It was a little unclear to me if there needs to be additional language here in the energy management plan section, if this extension, as sort of you were just discussing, if this extension is contemplating a new energy management plan being submitted, or if it's an extension of the one they're supposed to have already submitted. But I just struck the reference because I think most cases it will be an energy management plan for more than 3 years, but you may want to get clarity on that also.
yeah, it's because I think only 3 or 4 of the companies have actually submitted their plan or gotten it approved. So we may want to check on that. All right, I think we can keep going.
This pilot does have an annual report section. So I extended the report. So I was having a hard time picking what day the report should be extended to. If you're allowing an extension all the way to the end of 2026, you may want to have annual reports through then as well.
Mhm.
So that I added 3 years to 2022, but you may actually want to go longer. So I do think this is a little bit of a question mark here.
Okay, we'll ask them. See what they think.
And yes, as you
Actually
discussed,
run this long enough to get results.
right.
Right.
And as you were discussing a few moments ago, this language does include an evaluation of the pilot. So this is requiring that the PUC conduct or have a third party conduct an independent evaluation of the pilot. I haven't included all the language here, but there is language in the underlying language that created the pilot. And I did just want to reference that this does require on line 14 to 16, the commission shall submit recommendations to the General Assembly on or before January 15th, 2023. So the parties, the stakeholders did recommend keeping that same date. That's the date from the underlying project when the PUC is supposed to submit its recommendations. I don't know if that was their recommendation. It is something you can change if you'd like to wait until the extension has been completed to have the evaluation done, or if you'd like to make a different choice there.
They had a reason for that, and I'm not remembering it. Okay.
Is it a single recommendation here, Madam Chair?
No, they had a recommendation for that, for keeping that recommendation to the General Assembly. Oh, you're doing into grammar.
No, it'd be,
Could we
The-
do its recommendations?
well, they're not gonna be suggesting policy. They're gonna be suggesting, looking at what they found took place and giving us some choices. Or are they going to recommend policy?
I don't know. It depends on what they find, I assume.
Yeah, but they're not the recommenders of policy. They're the recommenders of choices.
Okay, we may be into semantics at this point. Do you have wording that would help?
I could do some wording on that if we're going to be taking this up again. Yep.
Wait, the commission is the PUC, right?
Yes,
Well, they do recommend policy. It's not this partnership for the working group, it's the PUC. And I believe recommending policy is
but
something.
they are evaluating something that has been tried out.
Yes,
And they will tell us what worked well about what was tried out. And they will tell us about the shortcomings of what was tried out. And they might tell us about something that took place that was unexpected and was unanticipated. And they will present those things to us. That's what
Okay,
evaluation.
but you don't want them to say, based on what we found, we think it would be a good idea to continue, or to modify this program?
That would be fine.
Oh, well, that's what I expect they would do.
Yeah, they would say, based upon these findings, we recommend that you continue, or modify the program.
Okay, so I'm trying to
We're,
figure out
and they,
where
and we
the
would,
problem is in this wording.
that it suggests they will pick one of those three instead of the three. I don't mean to take the committee's any further committee's time.
I think they will do what they will do, no matter
Yep.
what we write in here.
Yep.
All right, they will report back to us. All right. So let's go on to section 2. That's the partnership.
Sure. So this is the final element that was proposed by the parties. This is a working group. So on or before August 1st, 2022, the Department of Public Service shall convene the Energy Savings Account Partnership Pilot Program Working Group. The working group shall include the participants in the Energy Savings Account Program. So that's the one that's currently in statute.
Yeah.
The participants in the Energy Savings Account Partnership Pilot Program, so the subject of this bill,
Yeah.
Efficiency Vermont, and the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development or designee. I wasn't sure who they might want to be in this, but on or before January 15th, 2023, the Energy Savings Account Partnership Pilot Program Working Group shall report to the General Assembly with recommended changes to the Energy Savings Account Program rules. So
Okay.
this is sort of concurrent to what the PUC is
So the
doing also.
PUC is going to evaluate. All right, I guess we've got two different groups. The PUC is going to be looking at energy and efficiency. The other groups are more business oriented, so we may get two different decisions, but get two perspectives.
Madam Chair, I will bet you, Las Vegas will bet you 200 to 1 that the recommendation is that the policy be continued. You're asking the people that take the test to make the recommendation on the scores that they've earned?
This, they are going to tell us what they think, and the PUC is going to tell us what they think, and then we're going to decide.
So why don't we have the PUC that will do an independent analysis, tell us what they think, and that, which is fine. Why do we memorialize what we already know the participants are going to take?
Senator, this is Montpelier, not Washington, and I believe all sides have a right to be heard, even if we think we know what they're going to say and we don't like it. So I'm going to have everybody be heard.
Well, it strikes of, oh, now I'll get in trouble. It strikes of having the inmates run the prison. So
I'm sure Mitch McConnell would agree, Senator.
I'm not speaking about the feds.
Okay. So, committee. My proposed, I'll get, Senator Bray, we'll do your question
Sure.
or comment.
Well, so I do have a question about the bill on page 2, where it lays sub 3 that starts at line 8. It says, notwithstanding any contrary provision of 30 VSA 209, the normal energy efficiency charge language, you can use this money for the following. And then in the middle of it, it says, in addition, for a customer who's a manufacturer whose regulated fuel exceeds 600,000 metric cubic feet in 2017, I'm figuring this must be a trigger to bring somebody in without naming them. Do you know who qualifies for the treatment that follows after the 600,000 cubic?
Oh, is that the one?
I think it's West Rock.
Okay, that's in the pilot. It's not Omnia, which is the one in the original. Okay.
Okay.
It may well be West Rock then.
All right. Well, thanks. So I'm gonna. I'll work offline and come back. I just want to. I still have the concern that we're withdrawing electrical energy efficiency charge dollars to do things, for instance, to affect the use of unregulated fuels. So we have, to the degree that everyone paying in on electricity generated a benefit for everyone using electricity. Now we're going to have this. We're basically saying you can stop spending money on that and put it into something else that you prefer to do. But when we do so, I don't know what benefit to all the other customers who aren't offered this special treatment are going to receive. And there's a certain mutuality to the normal program that doesn't exist for this. And if we're going to evaluate it, I'd like to understand better what that relationship is. And I feel a little chastened by what we just went through before with Rygate, where someone had a special deal, and then eventually it becomes very hard that cost other people money. And it becomes very hard to start to say, no, we don't want to do that. And so I'll assign myself some homework to try to figure out whether or not that PUC report is really going to deliver the analysis that would help us see whether this is really good for all of Vermont or just good for the manufacturers who have been able to get themselves into this program.
I think, Senator, you'll find that there were 2 pilots that year, and it's part of an ongoing effort to see if as we're looking at climate change and emissions, if we could, alter the program.
Sure.
And because we've done a lot of the big electric stuff. And I'm not sure if in that context, if the PUC is going to be doing a bigger report. We'll check with them, and yeah, we should ask them back. Then this was part of that pilot. We also told them they could use up to a certain amount or a certain percentage of the electric rates to do non-electric. And that may all be tied into the efficiency bill we sent out. And it may have been 2 years ago and it never came out of your committee, but I know there were a couple of pilots in the same time frame looking at the same issue. And the idea is we would get the information back and make these decisions. But if we don't do the pilots, then we don't know what we're going to gain and what it's going to cost.
Right. So I agree completely. And I'm just wanting us to sort of go into this eyes wide open and make sure that the analysis helps us see clearly, because every manufacturing plant has a unique, whatever, greenhouse gas footprint. But right now, the money being drawn in is based on energy use, electrical energy usage. Maybe someone's going to say, well, we need a different metric and a different program. But I'm feeling like there's almost an implicit serious policy shift and change.
Yes, there is.
In this pilot. And I want us to be fully mindful of, so we don't get ourselves into that Rygate position where we said, well, we let them do it. Now we feel bad about saying you can't do it anymore.
I'm not sure they had a sweetheart deal when they started, because we didn't have solar when they started. I think we thought they were pretty good when they started.
Yeah. So,
When you were all putting in wood stoves. Rygate, yeah. I think they've turned into a sweetheart deal, but I don't think they were when they started.
right.
We paid their mortgage for their first 20 years to get them up and running, to see whether they could make electricity in a cost-effective way. We, the state, the public, invested the money for that experiment. And when the experiment was over, we essentially took out and paid a second mortgage on the same thing. And now we're talking about the third mortgage on Rygate. They're not investing their money, they're investing our money. So.
Okay, I've got Senator Brock, and then all right, Senator Brock.
Madam Chair, this is an issue that we talked about for hours when we put this together not that long ago. And now it looks like we're going back and relitigating it from the start again. This particular item that we're talking about relates to thermal energy. It was in the original pilot. And the goal was that this particular mill had an extremely high thermal usage of fuel. And the goal was to see whether or not, since they had expended essentially all that they could on improving the electrical energy usage, that we would do a pilot to see if there could be a concomitant increase in efficiency on the thermal side. That's what the pilot is all about.
Right.
That's why we did it. And as I say, we discussed it at great length in this committee.
Yes, we did. Okay. Senator Pearson.
And I guess my point is the pilot's not over and we're already being asked to extend it. And that seems, okay, been a pandemic. We've all understood that. We've offered flexibility in all manner of things, from tax due dates to you name it. So that's where I draw the line. I'm willing to say, all right, the timeline got messed up through no fault of anybody's, but that's it. That's how you honor the pilot, to my mind.
I think that's all that's being asked.
That's all that's being asked. And what the issue is that we have measures as to whether or not the pilot is successful for us to take a look at once the pilot is over to determine, is there any change in direction? There's no guarantee, and this is not necessarily pushing any change in direction. We don't know what the result's going to be, but it's simply a question of saying, let's allow this to play out appropriately. Now, I don't know, I saw this 26 date in this particular draft. It's the first time that I've seen it. And I think it is only fair, since the participants, and that includes the people who are overseeing it, agreed to this, to at least listen to the testimony to say, why did they do it? Maybe there's a good reason.
Yeah.
We don't know, and we're speculating that we don't like it, and we've taken zero testimony one way or the other. I don't think that's fair.
So we are going to send this back to the coalition and ask them for their comments, and probably highlight that there was a lot of concern about that 2026 date. And so be prepared to talk to us. And it may just be, since things are laid out so clearly in discussions, that it was misinterpreted what they meant. I couldn't imagine that ever happening, but sometimes it does.
Well, I thought you understood what you thought I said, but what you heard is not what I meant.
You got it. Much more elegant than my pudding. Okay, Senator Hardy.
It's fine. I just am concerned about the 26th date, and I actually agree with Senator McDonald about that report back. It seems a little sketchy to me, and it seems to me like they're going to report back, this was great, we should keep doing it. So those are the two items that are of a concern to me.
Okay, there's two report backs. One's from the PUC. One's
okay,
from
well,
the
maybe I missed that
coalition.
one,
Yeah.
and so maybe I don't know, but I mean, I agree with Senator Pearson that we should see how the pilot works, and maybe we see and it's great and we want to keep doing it, and maybe we see it's not so great and we want to stop, but we shouldn't. It shouldn't be a foregone conclusion.
No, I don't think that it is on anyone's part. Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, the people that are using the money to do this experiment and this pilot have been delayed for a year because of reasons beyond their control, which means the assessment is also delayed by a year. So why don't we just acknowledge that and give them, recognize that and move the date up a year and allow the original bill we passed to play out the way it was supposed to play out, and not have the participants not be disadvantaged by the lost year. Why don't we just simply do that? And
I think
then-
that's what the bill is asking. Only they're saying 18 months. And
Yes,
I'm
sir. I
not going to
think they're
get
saying
into
18 months.
arguing how long people lost.
so
I think they're saying 18 months, though, for a cogent reason, is that the situation has changed. It's not only do we have the pandemic, but we have the aftermath of the pandemic, which has been going on for a period of time. And that includes supply chain disruptions, et cetera.
So in my remarks to say that we should give them the time they need because that time has been lost, they get it back. Let's not monkey about with a different evaluation that we had not originally counted on, and leave the rest of the bill to operate the way we passed
Okay.
it a year and a half ago before the delays.
All right. Ellen. What I'm going to do is send this over, have the coalition in to respond, and we will highlight why do they want that, because that second report wasn't in the original pilot, right? The PUC was. So we will highlight why do they want that second evaluation and why the December 2026 thing. Those were the two big causes of concern. Will that work? And then we will have them in to talk to us. Okay. Okay. So it is now, well, we're 1 minute late, but we're moving. We're going to go on to S188, and Michael Grady has joined us. This is an act relating to regulating licensed small cannabis cultivation as farming. And Graham, and I am not even going to try and say your last name because I'm batting 1,000 at massacring names this week. So why don't you introduce yourself for the record?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Graham Unang Strufenacht. I am the Policy Director at Rural Vermont.
Okay. That is a moniker. All right. So the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you all. I understand it's late in the day and I want to respect your time. And first I'm going to shut this curtain because there's so much sun on my face.
Oh yeah, the sun's come back out here.
Yes.
In and out.
So as I said, my name is Graham Unang Strufenacht. I am the Policy Director at Rural Vermont. I'm not often in this committee, so I'll briefly introduce who my organization is, but we've been around for more than 35 years now in Vermont. We advocate for equity, accessibility, et cetera, in the agricultural community, starting in the farm crisis of the 1980s, leading up to now, often for scale appropriate regulations, supporting just livelihoods, et cetera.
Weren't you very active in GMO discussions?
In the early 2000s, Rural
Yeah.
Vermont was part of a large coalition in Vermont and nationally working
I
on.
remember a lot of emails.
It was before my time. I was almost 20 years old then. So I'm also a farmer myself here in Marshfield, Vermont. I raise grass-fed and finished beef. I do farm-based research and education. And Rural Vermont is also a member organization of the Vermont Cannabis Equity Coalition, which includes the Racial Justice Alliance, the Northeast Organic Farmers Association of Vermont, the Vermont Growers Association, and the founder of Trace Vermont, which is Vermont's seed to sale tracking system, which the state of Vermont contracts with for the hemp program. So this coalition includes two of the three largest member-based agricultural organizations in the state, as well as probably the largest member-based cannabis organization in the state, the Vermont Growers Association. Rural Vermont has been advocating on this issue in particular, increasingly so since 2016, and our coalition has been working with legislature, with the Cannabis Control Board, to effect a legalized and regulated cannabis space, which is racially just, economically equitable, agriculturally accessible, and environmentally sound since 2020 altogether. So we provided recommendations and testimony on numerous occasions that speak to the needs, concerns, and opportunities we have heard from members of our organizations, members of the Vermont community, and small farms and businesses. And that's sort of the background of who we are as a coalition and the work we've been doing. I briefly listened to your testimony yesterday from Senator Pearson and Legislative Counsel Grady, and I understand that you all sort of more or less understood that you were to pass this bill on with not much testimony. So I understand that there might be some reluctance to hear me out today and think about the changes we're proposing here. But I think from our perspective as a coalition, it's always worth sticking up for our principles and the needs of our members. And that's what I'm here to do today. I have shared a couple documents with you all ahead of time on this, and it might be helpful for me to just walk through the shortest one of those two, if you're willing.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think just for clarity, we have 1 week left to get all the bills out of committee that are going to pass this year. This bill just came to us. So we have some very heavy bills we have to get out. And if we don't get this one out, and you get a second shot in the House, if we don't get this one out, and this committee really is looking at the tax policy, not at the agricultural policy, because that's not our expertise. But our goal is, if we agree with the tax policy, to keep the bill moving, because if it doesn't get out, it dies. This is the second year. So that's the reason for the haste. I think you're going to find the cannabis fee bill is in the same position, that we're trying to get them all out and do the best job we can. But if it gets bogged down, then it could die. And I don't know that anyone wants it to die. Okay.
I understand, Madam Chair, and the limited time before crossover, and as well the break that you all have coming up for town meeting. At the same time, I think we would be concerned. We would not support this bill passing the legislature, period. So it's important for us to make our voices heard right now.
Okay, that's it. Not usually people come in that represent farmers that are opposed to having farmers exempt from taxes. So.
Well, we're here to advocate that all
Okay.
bills about that more farmers be excluded from taxes.
Okay.
But I, given what you're telling me, well, let me quickly just. I was told I could share my screen, and if that's okay. I'd ask permission to do that. So I will not go through everything here, and I will avoid the first part of this and try to focus on the financial aspects that you were discussing.
Well, just tell us what your concerns are. That puts it in context.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the primary problems being laid out are sort of addressed here in more of a gestalt form. Significant barriers to entry, divestment of market share and essential market license privileges from the essential service providers in this market, the people who are actually growing the plants, creating the products, and generating the value from this crop. Those are the cultivators, the nurseries, and the product manufacturers. And alternately, the unnecessary privileging of wholesalers, retailers, and vertically integrated dispensaries by providing dispensaries and retailers the only direct access to consumers, by providing all free and unchecked and disproportionate ability to set prices for consumers, for cultivators, for manufacturers, by allowing them to sell a diversity of products such as live plants that will not be allowed for these other folks, and providing the disproportionate market power to determine which products will be available to consumers, and therefore which products there will be demand for from producers and manufacturers. And when I get into the more parts of this specifically, there is inequity, lack of incentives, and significant barriers to entry, specifically for outdoor cultivators and farmers. And that's where I think some of the financial considerations come in. I spoke with someone from the fiscal office yesterday, Pat Tilterman, I believe was his name. Then there's this issue of functionally discriminatory outcomes for communities who don't currently have or have been historically divested of in order to discriminate against in relationship to access or ownership of agricultural land, ag businesses, or ag status. So this bill you have in front of you right now, it only affects land currently in current use, or those who have access to land currently in current use or currently in ag. We know that more than 99% of the agricultural land in the state of Vermont is owned by people who identify as white. We know that's not a matter of historical accident. We know that there is a state of emergency related to systemic racism in Vermont. All that we're asking is that this not only apply to existing land and agricultural use, but that people who currently don't have access to that land might be able to bring new land into it, just like any other crop. And maybe because they can make a little bit more in this market than another crop, they can actually start farming other crops as well and have access to farming, which is really a challenging thing to have access to, depending on your capital and your history of land access. And lastly, we talk about home grow allowances, but that's they may be less germane to this committee. I'll go through just pass through the amended title because I think that's also not as important. It's pretty simple. It comes straight to this question of all tiers of outdoor cultivation shall be provided the exemptions and qualifications otherwise applying to agricultural operations. So as I said, I spoke with Pat yesterday, and his question was related to, what are the costs if these folks, these small cultivators, are given this tax exempt status? And I'm going to go through some of those costs with you today. The costs that farmers will face if they're not allowed those exemption status. And I certainly already talked to the fiscal office, and I think that the costs for the legislature are very minimal, and for the state are very minimal.
Yeah, the fiscal office will be giving us a note after your testimony.
Excellent. But I think a more important question for this committee and the entire legislature needs to be asking is, what will the state gain if it creates an accessible marketplace by removing the barriers to all outdoor producers being given agricultural exemptions and creating an allowance or license enabling regulated direct sales for producers and manufacturers of the products they themselves are producing. For more wealth being decentralized and distributed directly to these businesses and members of our community, through this wealth being spent in other local small businesses and on other products and farm improvements, and financially from the excise tax and fees from licenses from tourism related to a very unique craft cannabis market. So now to the financial implications for farmers if this bill were to go through. And in fact, I mean, these implications exist in the current marketplace, but they will exist for anybody who wants to pursue cultivating it more than that base level of 1,000 square feet, which, as you commented in committee yesterday, is a very, very small amount of growing space. So essentially, anyone who wants to farm more than 1,000 square feet of cannabis, if this bill were to go through, in addition to other agricultural crops or any existing or newly purchased, more than 1,000 square feet of cannabis in addition to other agricultural crops, any existing or newly purchased infrastructure, equipment, supplies, or land which is considered agricultural will not be able to be used for cannabis cultivation. That includes structures. So if a farm currently has a structure which it bought the materials for under tax exempt status and it's being used for an agricultural purpose, that structure, whether it's a barn for a tractor, whether it's the shed they keep their amendments in, whether it's where they store their fuel, whether it's where they start their seeds, whether it's the greenhouse, the high tunnels they use, those will not be allowed to be used. So they'll face a choice of getting into this industry and needing to essentially double all the equipment they have for whatever they want to grow in cannabis, create new spaces to store all that equipment. Then you have the cultivation costs from fuel itself to tools and equipment, to amendments and treatments, from transport and irrigation supplies, potentially even water sources. If a well, for example, was dug with federal dollars to NRCS or something. Then you have contracting, even contracting people who have agricultural equipment themselves. You might want someone, if you're a 1,000-foot cultivator, or next scale up is 2,500 square feet. If you want to contract someone to come in and till your ground, but that implement was purchased under an agricultural exemption, technically they're not supposed to be doing that. They're not supposed to be using it for anything non-agricultural. And then there is the last piece, of course, which is the land itself. So anyone wanting to cultivate more than 1,000 square feet right now, current use, ag easements, ag designation, those are all limitations to actually being able to participate in this market. And not only are there financial costs associated with this, as I've just gone through for farms, but there are logistical and other challenges which will disproportionately affect particular farms. So small farms, which have less room or acreage to build new infrastructure, or farms and individuals who have less capital to invest in redundant equipment, supplies, infrastructure, or structures on their farm. The Kerry Ware, the Agency of Agriculture, came to the Senate Ag Committee and called the situation an untenable mess that farmers would be faced with. He really spoke only to the smallest scale, but everything he said applies to any other scale. And I just want to remind folks that I think we can get a little concerned based on how hemp rolled out in Vermont. But the maximum scale for outdoor production of recreational cannabis in Vermont is going to be less than an acre. We're talking about 37,000 square feet. We're not talking about people, and there's also a limitation on horizontal integration, which means that you can't own multiple cultivation licenses. So there's a limitation on folks with a disproportionate amount of wealth or large companies to come in and really dominate the market space. But there are also these really challenging barriers to people just being able to access at a really small level. I think you all are probably familiar with a lot of the financial challenges farms and farmers face in Vermont and nationally. I don't really need to get into that. Nationally, the average annual national income for farmers in the last number of years has been something around negative $1,200. I mean, so this is also just a significant opportunity for these folks who are experts in cultivating plants to actually be able to participate in this marketplace as opposed to be put on the side. What we've often heard, and we heard in Senate Ag, is that people want to move slowly. Now, I have never seen a process maybe more rushed than the CCB process, the process basically after S54 was passed. We're at a place right now where the CCB is still articulating rules while the market is beginning to get rolled out, and while the legislature is contemplating bills to amend those rules. If you want to go slow, I would encourage you to step back and slow this market down and wait until you can actually create equitable structures so that people can participate, and you won't have this immediate, months of monopoly control by these multi-state operators, then transitioned into what is a very difficult market for people to access, especially for outdoor production. The last thing I just want to say is a limitation for outdoor producers is that the tiers themselves are just not realistic. I think that's important for you to know. 1,000 square feet. I have only talked to a couple cannabis cultivators who are interested in that scale of outdoor production. It's just not realistic to make a serious living off of. And they face a lot of questions, especially given there is no direct marketing allowed. Small farms survive off of being able to, create a price point with consumers directly. If you're reliant on wholesale markets like this marketplace forces upon cultivators, then you really have no market agency and a really hard time projecting the potential profits of your business, and the risk analysis of whether or not you should invest is very hard. It's hard to perform. And I think that's what we've been hearing from a lot of cultivators as well, is they have a lot of questions because the rules have been written for the MSOs. They've been written for over a year. The rules are still being written for them. And at the earliest, an outdoor cultivator will get approval for their license, it's May. They should have started those seeds probably in March or April. So we're facing some real challenges there. I also want to get to this direct sales thing, and I know that.
Okay, we're running out of time, and we have no control. This has been 6 years in negotiation to get here. And this committee does not have jurisdiction over direct sales or anything else. So if you can talk to us about the taxing section, which is all we have jurisdiction over, that would be helpful. Because we want to hear from joint fiscal after you, and some of us have a 5:30 meeting. So we're going to have to move this along.
I would say the last thing relevant to you from a financial perspective is I think that direct sales does affect you all from a financial perspective. I don't have to get into it. I also think this bill that you currently have proposes new privileges for wholesalers, and it revokes privileges from nurseries. And whether or not live plant sales remain as an agricultural as part of the cultivator status will probably affect tax exempt status of those plant sales if they're considered agricultural, or given that status, given that they're not going to be called agricultural or given the official status because of the federal oversight issues.
Right.
I'm happy to answer questions about the tax status. I think I just tried to communicate to you the implications for us as farmers of passing this, and the opportunities, I think, for the state of bringing more of these people into this marketplace.
Okay. And you are all active farmers?
I'm sorry, all of us who?
Yeah, that are members of your organization. My daughter worked in agriculture for about 20 years. I'm very familiar with NOFA and hemp and grains, but this is a new area. So is rural Vermont made up of active farmers or just interested people?
Rural Vermont and NOFA Vermont, our membership is made up of farmers, non-farmers, all kinds of people. Our boards are substantially constituted of farmers. Some of our staff are farmers, and we work very directly with, basically all of our recommendations come from interfacing with the legacy cultivator community, people who want to cultivate in this. So for example, when we do our cannabis work, when we do our work on raw milk, we do our work on slaughter and processing, we're pulling together stakeholders from those industries who are practicing on the ground, see where they want to go with these policies, how they're affected, and bring them together. That's the advantage of healing from a member-based group, a nonprofit member-based group like us, as opposed to the Vermont Cannabis Trade Association, which represents the multi-state operators in this state, where we're talking about people representing different people.
Again, that this has been 6 years in negotiation, at least we figured out yesterday. And at this point, any major changes could kill the whole operation. So I'm going to try and keep this committee focused on basically the sales tax and the Act 250 allowance, not 250, current use. Oh, and how'd my camera get turned off? There we go. So committee, any questions? And if anyone objects to my trying to focus us on the taxes, let me know. But I try to not mess another committee's work unless somebody, we think there's a grievous thing that needs to be fixed. Senator Pearson.
Well, Madam Chair, just to let you know that Senate Ag did hear from Graham, and he's presented a lot here, but I would say we wrestled a lot with why we would sort of give a close to farming definition with a small outdoor facility versus a larger one. And there was a lot of sympathy on the committee to move to the larger one. So if this committee was so inclined, I don't think Ag would be jumping up and down about it, but it was a recommendation of the Cannabis Control Board that we start out small. They in fact have only promised to issue the smaller cultivator licenses. It's not clear if that'll be adequate, but they're, if they thought they could meet the demand by only offering small licenses, they would do it that way. So, in the end, we begrudgingly were convinced to go slow and recognizing that this is not a topic where we're going to close the books this session and never come back to it. We're clearly going to be reacting to it as it's changing year after year and as we're learning. And if the federal government declassifies cannabis, then, our opportunities frankly get a lot easier. The only other thing I would say is that there is nothing in the current structure that prohibits a farmer from getting a retail license to put, under those conditions also on the farm. There's nothing that prohibits somebody from getting more than one kind of permit or license. So, I don't think many of us would vision sort of a farm stand operation for cannabis, but it could be possible if somebody wanted to have more direct on-farm sales for them to apply. And so, there's a lot here. I don't agree with everything Graham said, but I agree with a lot of what he's saying. And I recognize that, I guess Senate Ag would say it's fair to say, we'll keep talking about some of these issues that are not all the way in the direction that he and others have advocated for.
Okay. Any other questions? Senator Hardy.
Yeah, I had a question about the issue that I asked for clarification about the other day about what the people versus land thing, and the qualification is about the land, not the person who's doing the farming or the owner of the land even. So somebody could lease a 1,000 square foot piece of property that was already in current use and use it to grow cannabis. Is that right?
Yes, it's not only is that right, but somebody would be very smart to set it up. If you are a farmer now and you wanted to diversify and have a small grow operation, everything we're hearing is that you would be very smart to shield your business in a manner that is effectively leasing some access to protect your investments, to maintain your ability to seek federal grants on the rest of your farm operation. It's complicated. And as much as this committee knows I will bang away at keeping it simple, there's nothing simple about this intersection. And so
I'm going to have to cut you off because I just got a text telling me 2 senators have another meeting at 5. And so I want to give Graham a chance the other Graham Campbell to give us just so everybody can hear their report. And then if the committee wants to continue, we can do that. I have to leave by 5:30. So Graham Campbell.
Thank you, committee.
Not usual we get 2 Grahams in the same meeting.
I know, two grams for the price of one on the same bill.
Yeah.
This is probably, it's like 222 almost. So my name's Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office, and I haven't posted anything for the committee, but I have been working on this bill with Patrick Titterton, our other fiscal analyst. And I think the long and short of it is, I think the obtaining or doing an accurate estimate for this bill would be, pretty close to impossible. I think so. Overall, it's at least from a tax policy perspective, it is a little bit funky that there is a carve out within the current sales tax exemption law and within current use that these types of cultivators are not considered agriculture. And that my conversation with the tax department is that administratively, that's not a big deal. But I think after talking to them about this bill, I think practically speaking, from an administrative perspective and a fiscal impact perspective, it's very difficult to know exactly what this will end up being. Okay. So I think a couple of points that I think the committee might want to consider is that generally at least within the sales tax world, use-based exemptions are very difficult for the Department of Taxes to administer and enforce and audit. Because remember, it's the business, it's the retailer who is charged with collecting the sales tax, and they don't typically, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they're not necessarily asking businesses, all of them, are you buying this twine for cannabis or are you buying this twine for another purpose? So this bill, I think, adds another layer of that sort of difficulty for the purposes of estimating a fiscal impact, because it's not just what are you using this product for, it's what are you using this product for, but also are you big or small? And so that I think would be quite difficult for retailers to administer and the Department of Taxes particularly to actually enforce and audit those types of situations. The second point that we have that I have written down here with Pat is that our interpretation that small cultivators, because the space here, it's 1,000 square feet to grow cannabis, that it would be very difficult for a cultivator of this size to be living solely off of cannabis. So in general, at least within the machinery and equipment exemption for agriculture, you only get the exemption if it's predominantly used for agriculture. And so what I think we're most likely to happen, particularly for these small cultivators, is that because it's not profitable to operate, or might not be enough to live on 1,000 square feet of cannabis cultivation, you're likely to see you're likely to see small cultivators doing something else agricultural. And I think that is, again, clouding the actual fiscal impact, because if you have a small cultivator who's growing 1,000 square feet of cannabis, but then they, the rest of their farm is agricultural in nature and it has the 75% rule in statute, then they would be able to claim the exemption and use the equipment for cannabis anyway. So practically speaking, I don't know if it has a fiscal impact, but it does have administrative challenges. And the final thing I would say about this is that I took a look at the exemptions within sales tax law, and I believe, based upon my reading of the statutes, that this would be the only type of sales tax exemption where it is based upon the size of the business, if that makes sense. So there are lots of use-based exemptions within sales tax law, but we do not have sales tax exemptions that are based upon the size of the business in general. So whether it's, the size of the farmer, the size of the company, it's generally related to just the use of the product that they're buying. So this would be sort of a departure from existing sort of sales tax law. So some of that I don't think we're going to be able to calculate or do a fiscal impact on this. I guess relative to current law, it would have a negative fiscal impact in theory, but practically speaking, we don't think it'll be, something that is quantifiable.
Okay. So if I am a cultivator and because of federal law, cannabis is not considered agriculture, I am not going to have access to the sales tax exemptions, right?
That is, so I can't say for sure whether that's federal law, but that is written into the cannabis statute right now, that cannabis cultivators are not considered, it's not considered a crop, rather, for the purposes of the sales tax exemptions.
Michael O'Grady just popped up. So we got the law here. So going through this yesterday, my understanding was this was really limited to current use and using a small section of a current use farm. Or I assume maybe you could do it if it were forest land and you had a, maybe not, a clearing? No, okay. So this would just be current use. You can put 1,000 square feet of your 30 acres into cannabis growing and not be kicked out of current use because you're not growing corn on it, right? And when you go to buy your twine or your tractor, it's irrelevant whether or not you're going to tie up your tomatoes or your cannabis plants. It's, you're a farmer, you have the ID that says I'm a farmer. I'm in current use. So I thought it was a very limited scope. Am I right about that?
If you would like me to respond to that, Chair, I can.
Yes, please.
For terms of use value, yes, it's very limited scope. And remember, the lead-in provides that the land had to be subject to the RAPs anyway, so it was already in farming.
Yes.
So the person that's holding the cultivator license, small cultivator license, would have been farming previously, or the person that was farming on the land, to reflect Senator Hardy's point, would have been farming anyway. The land would have already been enrolled in use value. With respect to the sales tax exemptions, the Department of Tax has a certification form that is supposed to be filled out when a person is applying for ag fertilizers, pesticides, supplies, machinery, and equipment that are exempt under 2 of these exemptions. And so I could contemplate the department revising that form to make it eligible for small cultivators who are seeking these exemptions as well. So I respect Graham's point that it may be difficult to discern what a farmer who has diversified is seeking the purchase for, I'm not trying to mitigate his input that administratively it may be difficult. I'm just trying to say, I think there are ways that the Department of Taxes could address this provision.
Oh, so they could ask on their certificate if you're a small grower.
Right. If you certify, because it's basically an attestation that you qualify, and it's there as much for the audit of the seller as it is for the exemption for the buyer.
It's like a sales tax number.
Correct.
Right. Yeah, I think Mr. O'Grady has that correct. The purpose of the sales tax exemption certificates is it's a self-certification. And so after talking with the Department of Taxes, the way that works is the individual or the farmer or the cultivator in this instance would fill out the certificate. And I suppose the Department of Taxes could put onto the certificate information about, whether you're a small cultivator, whether your purchases are going to be used for cannabis cultivation. But it's my understanding those certificates are mostly used for sort of post after the sale audits of the business. And the Department of Taxes does not, preemptively a priori check whether the farmer is using the exemption certificate for cannabis cultivation. And so I think Mr. Brady is right that they could put something onto the form to make that clear, to change the administration difficulties of this. But I still think difficult in a situation where you would have a small cultivator who, again, has a diversified set of crops that they're growing. They might fill out the exemption certificate for just a broad, use of let's just say it's twine. They would fill out their certificate, and it's not clear whether they're using the twine for their small cultivator status for cannabis, or whether they're using it for another thing.
So I'm having been through the wars over bark mulch, and we went through it with whether or not medications were being used for veterinary purpose, for farm animals or for pets, and we still couldn't get past the sheepdog that herded your sheep and then slept on your bed. I just think that trying to ask a retailer especially to be responsible to discern whether or not you're going to use that twine, to tie up tomatoes or cannabis is really unfair of the retailer, who is really acting as an agent of the state and collecting state taxes and being liable for those state taxes. They aren't liable, but they get in big trouble if they make a mistake. So I thought this was very limited.
So just to be clear, that's current law. So under current law, the retailer is supposed to be asking whether they're using
whether or not
cannabis.
It's just like if I go in and say I'm a wholesaler and I'm going to put this yarn into something, I have to have a sales tax number. Senator Pearson.
Well, I think this conversation to me highlights actually the opposite of where our discussion is, right? These are farms that are already in there. Right. They already exist. They're already farming. So everything they buy is already exempt from the sales tax. And we're just saying that also applies to your small plot. It's actually, and so I think we've been looking at it from the other way around. Yeah. And actually the farm's gonna say, yeah, hi, you know me, I'm a farmer. Can I have the twine? I do think it's the argument for why it's kind of silly to say this only applies for the small grows, but there's a lot of arguments to be made that way, but that is where we are. And the conversation has all been about, this isn't going to be your only crop. This is already existing land. So we're maintaining that universe in this construct. It gets a little fuzzier when we're talking about larger grows, but that's in a way that's just included here by omission, not by a new policy. The new policy we're setting is very consistent with what happens for those farmers today.
Okay, so Senator Brock, did I see your hand? No. Okay, I'm hallucinating. Any other questions? We're running out of. Okay. Final comment.
Was that me, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thanks. I just wanted a chance to respond to some of the things that I heard, and there's a few things here. One was Senator Pearson's suggestion that we can just get retail licenses, and I want to just again clarify that that's a real mischaracterization of what we're asking for. Currently, farms can market their own products that they principally produce on their farms. That's all we're asking for. People can market the crops they produce on their farm. That's very different from a retail license, which is buying and selling products from other people to market throughout the year. He said that the CCB is only going to start with the smallest scale of licenses, and we have not heard that from the CCB. And I've talked to a number of people who've been in touch with the CCB who are applying for other licenses. So that would really surprise me. And it would really surprise me how many, if they get enough people. I mean, that's just not realistic to meet the demand that they projected themselves. And in terms of the leasing suggestion from Senator Hardy, I think there's just so much, as we've been going through here, for someone who currently has their land I mean, it's hard enough as a farmer to get to lease land sometimes. Now you want to lease it for crops that's sort of agricultural, sort of not. They could have their land seized by the federal government. You know, like these are risks. It's one thing to take if you own the land as a cultivator, and you're probably not going to pull that land out of your mortgage and then, you know, buy it through another business and then pull it out of current use so that you can then lease it to a new business, etc. So those are my points. Like, I just don't think those are effective arguments. The last thing I'd say is that at the end of Senate Agriculture's conversation last week or 2 weeks ago, maybe it was, with Chair Pepper of the CCB, Senator Pearson said, I'm just concerned that if we pass this, we're going to be leaving farmers out of this marketplace. And Pepper's response, the heart of it, and I'm paraphrasing here, was that that's just the growing pains of this marketplace. And just so you all know, that's just unacceptable to the people we're talking to. And I think it ideally would be unacceptable to the representatives of the people we're talking with as well.
Okay, well, this is going to go to the House. And again, this committee is only dealing with tax policy. So unless you have an issue with the tax policy, I want to make sure that this moves forward, because if it doesn't, all farmers are going to be in jeopardy. And we're dealing with a unique process here because this product is still a classified drug and banned by the federal government. And we've been dealing with this. We didn't have banks that would deal with them. And we had to find a credit union finally said they would, but all nationally licensed banks stood to lose their license if they helped, you know, just gave you a bank account or a checking account. So it's been one baby step at a time. And I think we're all aware of the issues, and that some people would like to go into cannabis cultivation larger than 1,000 square feet. And I think it's been the small versus the large versus you can set up your farm stand versus the quality control that has been argued for at least 6 years. And this is where we are. But it's just the first start. We're going to move, it'll move forward.
Well, I appreciate your time. And I
Okay,
would just
thank
encourage folks to read the entirety of the documents I sent forth, because we address security concerns and all those things that were just mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Committee, that's it. We've lost 2 members. We can go off live.